which sounds kind of weird because the crossover isn't necessarily there because this is not PE by any means, but experience with working with numbers, working with different populations is way more important than any certification you can get.
Okay, everyone, I am here with Tanner Lowry. Tanner has a master's degree in exercise science, and he is the general manager and owner of D1 Training in Boise, Idaho. He's also a very good friend of mine, a very dear friend, and a former student of mine who worked in my lab. And he has had an incredible amount of experience these last 5 to 10 years as he has gotten into D1 training. So Tanner, thank you for being here. I'm excited for what the students are going to learn from you and your perspective. I guess to start, could you just describe what D1 is? And oh yeah, great picture. And just kind of give the students a description of what kind of a facility that you run and work with.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll take off this picture in a second, but that's kind of what it looks like. D1 started in 2002 over in Nashville, Tennessee. It's Peyton Manning's company, and I was blessed to find it in down south when I went to grad school post WSU. I went to grad school at Baylor, and I found D1 Waco, finished off my graduate degree, and then I'm going to take this virtual thing off too. But finished off my graduate degree, and I was with D1 Waco for about 2.5 years. I was the assistant general manager down there. And then transitioned up to Boise in January 2019, and we opened that April. So it's been a good transition. D1 as a facility is usually anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 square feet. We train anybody from ages 6 to 90 years old. Usually have about 6 squat racks. Turf space is going to have about 25 to 40 yards, maybe 75 yards in our Dallas facility that we had down south. So it fluctuates, but we're a class-based facility, similar to what you see like an Orange Theory for adults. And we also do groups of elementary, middle school, and high school age. And it's grown into what is now 54 franchises. When I got started in 2015, there was 5 corporately owned facilities, and they switched to the franchise model, and it's blossomed into what's now, it's all over the nation. We're the only ones in the Pacific Northwest. Our team's looking towards 10 in the Pacific Northwest. We're just, seeing what markets will fit. D1 Boise is the fastest growing one ever. The community has been really receptive of it, but we're excited to be here. I think I kind of hit everything on that part of it, but thanks for having me. First off, I should have started with this. Go Cougs, for sure. That's a topic of conversation around here. It's a big Boise State place, so I don't fit in, but we have the blue turf because it fits the community. But thanks for having me, Dr. Connolly. This is great. I'm humbled to even, have you ask. So.
Sure. I think you bring a unique perspective because of your business experience. A lot of other individuals that my students will work with respect to athletes, they might work with coaches, they might work with athletic departments, doctors. I think you're in a unique, you have a unique perspective given your business and managerial experience. So I guess my first question, and it's sort of a general one, is in your line of work as a manager at D1, what are a few of the crucial exercise training factors that you have seen which are so important to facilitate exercise performance? And I know that's general because there's different types of athletes, and that's actually sort of part B of that question, which we'll get to in a minute. But in general, what are some of the most important things you've seen as you've worked with athletes?
Very generally speaking, it's that there's a hierarchy system in which you can train an athlete. And it starts with aerobic training, right? They have to have some sort of basic conditioning. They have to have some sort of flexibility, mobility within themselves in order to progress, right? If they don't have either of those two things, then there's a ceiling at which is set a lot lower than if they start with that component, right? So it always starts with aerobic training and then flexibility, range of motion, and then you graduate to what I consider like a foundation of strength. And then the transition comes to more sports skill, more power, all that stuff. But if you don't have that initial foundation, then you can't progress an athlete past a certain point. So I think that's one thing that's overlooked in the strength conditioning, and it's come a long way, but I'll be perfectly transparent. When I was at Washington State, we overlooked that aspect of a little bit as a strength intern there. So the transition when I got down south, with the immense amount of experience that the Baylor strength conditioning staff had. They grinded it in me really, really fast that you have to start with the basics for every athlete, collegiate on down. And I think that fits more into our model just because the kids in here come with very minimal base. They don't have a base in training. They've just been doing sport. So we might be the first glimpse they have at performance training. And so we have to start very generalized with conditioning first, foundation of strength, and then we can get more creative, right, with sports skill work and explosiveness.
Great. You just touched on it a little bit, but what differences in those concepts do you see with different types of athletes? Maybe an aerobic-based athlete versus an anaerobic athlete, or team versus individual sport athletes, or maybe even kids versus adults. Like what differences do you see there?
Well, I'll start with kind of across the spectrum for sport. The lack of flexibility and range of motion typically stems from athletes that are only doing one sport year round, right? They're only moving in one plane. If they're only moving in one or maybe a couple planes, but not all planes, right? That's why multi-sport athletes at a young age are so beneficial. Now, I'm not going to go into that conversation because everybody has their opinions, but I'll say that multi-sport athletes at a young age is super beneficial because they're not stuck changing direction in cleats on grass over and over and over. And they're not, or, if they're football players or soccer players, they're also not stuck on a hardwood their entire lives, jumping, cutting, moving, jumping vertically, but not horizontally or laterally like a basketball player usually is. So I would say the wear and tear of some athletes, especially like middle school, high school, stems from them only doing sport and not doing training or getting a base of flexibility and mobility. So the major difference across sports is if an athlete is selective, then they're going to have selective abilities in certain areas, right? And then if we're talking about from different teams, it kind of fits, right? Different sports, people are going to have abilities in different areas. Did I kind of answer that question a little bit?
Yeah, that was perfect. Thank you so much. What factors outside of exercise training are crucial to athletes optimizing their performance? I know you focus a lot on the exercise training, but I know your experience and I know the kind of people that you've worked with, and you're all about the athlete achieving their goals and performance, and that involves life skills too, right? So what factors are important from what you've seen in helping young or middle-aged or even older athletes achieve their goals outside of exercise regimens and training programs?
Yeah, so I'll start with my role is to drive people in the building and to grow our market, right? And so I do a lot of like the initial consultations and the initial workouts for a lot of our athletes, which is the most important thing we can do. And the first thing I do with an athlete is if they shake my hand at the front at the door and they give me the fish or they don't look me in the eye, I make them reassess that handshake, right? And that sort of sets the tone. It sets the tone for the parent standing next to him, right? Because they're like, oh, this guy's serious, right? And I've had athletes that get very distraught when I make it happen, right? Usually I get a little bit of a smirk and they're like, okay, I'm sorry, I was nervous, but sometimes athletes are like, whoa, this guy takes it really seriously. But that sets the tone on the character development side of what we do. And it's so important in our whole facility. And I'll get to our character words and why we drive that so hard in just a second. But the second thing I do with like an initial consultation with our teams, and I hope and pray that every time our coaches have the ability to get in front of a group, they demand the same presence. Because I learned this really, really fast from Coach Kaz Kazadi down at Baylor, and then Coach Dave Lang is at WSU. Rest in peace, Dave, for sure. Actually, one of his quotes are right behind me, so every day I read it. But he was my mentor at Washington State, and he commanded a presence from the very beginning. The first time you meet him, and every single day you got to command a presence. And you're not a dictator because you're there for them, but if you command a presence, they're going to take you more seriously. And you have to promote yourself as a serious coach in order to get their respect. And so in a team training setting, I walk up to everybody and make sure I have their eyes on me, and I say, okay, guys, when I say the phrase, do you understand? I want you to say, yes, sir. Do you understand? And if they say, yes, sir, then I know we're starting on the right note. And I'll just explain to them that's not like a dictatorship. It's a sign of respect. And I'm going to say the same thing to them. When they ask me a question, I'll say, yes, sir. And it follows suit, or yes, ma'am, obviously, because we train all athletes across the board. But that's sort of where you can start with the character development. D1 as a company has 12 character words around our facility. Every facility has them, all of which are assigned to a certain month. And then we have a character athlete of the month. And from our 7 to 11-year-olds all the way up to our 18-year-olds and even our adults, we have a breakout huddle at the end of each workout. And embedded on our Wednesdays are our character athlete word of the month, right? And it's just like you pick out an athlete, or you can say it yourself, like what it means to you, and you break out on that character word. And so character development is a big part of our marketing plan. So when we send out information on camps and stuff we have for our young kids, we always say that character development is involved. And our words are anything from dedication, discipline, integrity, honor, all that stuff. And it hits home for athletes that are really going to take this seriously. And then the major part of our initial consultation, our initial team training workouts is we discuss the importance of grades and marketability, because the connotation being D1, being that the company's called D1, is everybody wants to go to the Division I level. Everybody wants to play in college. And we harp on them to maintain their grades, because if they can't do that, you're not marketable no matter how high your vertical jump is. So the character development starts from the handshake at the front door, and it continues throughout our training. And that's why, we get professional athletes in here that love coming, because we do it with them too. And we take it very, very seriously from whistle to whistle. So.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So one of the things that I know that you have a real passion for is working with these young athletes. I know you work with adults also, but you have a gift with kids and with adolescents, and you enjoy teaching the principles of exercise and health to them. I know you've shared a few things with me about your past when you were a kid, and what how your journey was shaped, and how you wish you had that what you're offering kids, I think, now. But you've had a lot of experience, and I guess my next question is, what lessons have you learned about working with the young athlete with respect to facilitating a system where they can reach their full potential? What have you learned? It could be specific or general.
Mm-hmm. I'll say one size does not fit all, right? And we just got out of probably a 5 to 10 year little skid where parents thought that resistance training and performance training was going to stunt kids' growth. So we're just happy to be able to train them, but there's no one size fits all model. Even though in our class setting we have a basic format and structure at which we train our athletes, but everybody's individualized, right? Like there's no squat form that's going to be beneficial to everyone across the board. There's no method of jumping that's going to make them jump as high as they possibly can, right? That's on the biomechanical side. I think Katina would be happy that I just referenced biomechanics, because that was the hardest class I've ever experienced in my life. But on the biomechanical side, everybody's different, right? But reaching their full potential just means that they need to have the confidence in themselves, right? We're going to make them better, right? But their approach to everything that we do, if they're training at 80%, that 80% becomes their 100%. So if they're not confident in their approach and confident in their technique and efficiency and movement patterns first, then they're not going to excel as athletes, right? So there's that ceiling I was talking about that continues to lower if they're not confident in their approach and confidence in their abilities. So reaching out to youth athletes and making them confident and knowing that what they're doing is going to benefit them, and also having the professional in the field that's able to give them criticism that they can take and run with, is going to make them infinitely better. And I think that's sort of where, like, if there is a wall that needs to be broken down when it comes to youth sport development, it's that one. It's if you can, barricade or, push through that confidence wall, sky's the limit. And that's 95% of what we do is motor skill development and increasing confidence in these kids. If they can get through those two basic things, then their ceiling becomes a lot higher.
I think that's interesting. That leads us really nicely into our next question. You also have to coordinate a lot with coaches and teams and maybe even parents, right? So you get an interesting perspective into the way sports teams and sports organizations run themselves, right? You probably interact a lot with coaches. So in general, from what you've seen, both for maybe youth or college age students even, where do you think teams and organizations sports performance groups need to be more progressive?
I had the best thing I ever did was become an intern at Washington State Strength and Conditioning Program, because it obviously allowed me to progress in my education, because I was able to finish the minor, right? So it's more applicable to what I'm doing now. But at the time, I didn't want to be a strength coach. So the irony was there too. But what I was able to do, I got more out of the actual experience in the weight room than I got reading any book, right? And I think that's where people forget, right? I've hired over 200 coaches since I actually just hired my 211th coach the other day. And we have 28 on staff as of right now, but that's just in this facility. And I've done hiring and consulting for almost every market I've been affiliated with. And I've had the most luck with the middle of the road coach that has a lot of passion, and he had some sort of experience, right, that he can run with. And it's funny because the experience in being at the Division I and being an intern isn't as productive as some experiences. Like in our model with the young kids that we train, it's not usually as beneficial as like running a YMCA summer camp, which sounds kind of weird because the crossover isn't necessarily there, because this is not PE by any means. But experience with working with numbers, working with different populations is way more important than any certification you can get, right? Obviously, certifications make you more marketable, and it puts you kind of in the door, sort of like a GPA does for an athlete. But you have to have the metrics of experience with different populations in our model and experience with different people to really make it. Because I've never seen a pigeonholed coach of a certain market really thrive in a D1 setting. So if you don't have experience with multiple populations, your ability to work with kids at any age level, and also work with adults, then it's an uphill battle. And so I encourage certifications. Like I think I almost have all of them, but I also encourage experience, and putting in your time and effort without getting a paycheck shows your experience. And I did it for 3.5 years at Washington State. Being an intern there, I could have just not done it my last year and a half, and I could have just worked in your exercise physiology lab, but I decided to continue to do both. And it was the best experience of my life because I was doing it for nothing. I wasn't just there to get a paycheck. So I might as well get as much knowledge as I can and just feed off of those that know a heck of a lot more than me. So I think to answer that question in a very roundabout way, to optimize performance of athletes and to optimize performance of any population, you have to have some sort of experience with all populations, because a certification and talking people over people's head isn't going to make you the best coach.
So you want to make sure to bring people in that can work with various populations and have that experience. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if I have two people side by side, this person's more certified, but this person loves people, I'm going with the person that loves people, and I can just turn them into a good coach with experience. Right. So love on people, give yourself as much experience as possible, seek out people that are better than you, because there's always someone better than you, always in your particular field, and just feed off of them and absorb like a sponge your whole entire life.
Okay. That's great. Thank you. Let's switch over a little bit to more of a managerial standpoint, because that's what I know you're a trainer first. You're a people person first, and you love to train and help individuals, but now you're also really developing managerial skills, and you're a very gifted leader. You have this great mind for it, I think. So what have you learned? What are the factors which are so crucial to creating and building a facility or a sports-based environment where athletes can succeed?
Hiring, like that's it, plain and simple, and creating a process of which people feel comfortable from the very second that they walk in. Because in the health and fitness industry, for the general population, a gym is the hardest thing for people to try out, right? It is. Like people will walk into any grocery store, convenience store, or anything because they understand what they're getting themselves into. Nobody understands the experience outside the doors until they walk in. And so creating a culture and environment of great people, first and foremost, personable people, that's super important. But then people that truly love what they do is is how you develop a good culture. And the team that we have here is the best by far I've ever experienced. But that's why we're so successful, is because um, it's a culture that people just they walk in and they get it, right? Like families come and hang out and watch their kids to train, even though they have a million other things to do, because they like hanging out with us, like catching up with us. And the family phrase is thrown around a lot in the health and fitness industry, but it's legit here. Like my wife and I moved across the country or back across the country to start this. And these people, we work 60 to 80 hours a week together. And if I'm going out for my birthday dinner, I'm inviting my whole team, right? Because those are the people I want to hang out with. And so developing that camaraderie within a group is going to make it such an inviting place to come in for the 6-year-old that wants to improve her vertical jump or in upper body strength because she's sick of her friends, making fun of her because she can't serve it over the net in volleyball, right? But also the 82-year-old client that wants to come and do personal training because she didn't have the best experience down the street, right? We're inviting and open to all of those people because that's our target market, is 6 to 90, So you have to find the right people that can gel with all different populations, and then just strictly just love what they do. And then from an optimal performance standpoint, you have to find the people that just thrive on continuing their own education and continuing on, being a sponge. My most educated coach in here is a guy that started as an intern with us when we first opened. And he sort of reached a plateau in his own education. I mean, he got his CSCS, he's finished his bachelor's degree at University of Idaho. And he's like, oh, I got my CSCS. I'm done continuing my own education. And so I made him my intern coordinator, because now if he's going to teach, then he's got to really know it better than he did to take a test. And so continue your own education is super important, but the environment that we create because we love what we do is twice as important. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So here's our final question. And so here you go. How do you feel that D1 specifically has shaped your perspective on sport performance? I guess that's the first part of the question. So I'll let you answer that first, and then I'll ask the part 2 of that.
So ironically, D1 has shaped me a lot less than Baylor and Washington State did on enhancing sports performance, because the programming methodologies and the culture and environment methodologies that D1s across the country now have were because of my experiences there, if that makes sense. Because we created the continuing education system in-house for all the D1s, and it stemmed from my environment the places I was around at Baylor and at Washington State. So D1 has shaped it in the perspective that we now train adults and kids, right? And the training methodologies are similar across the board as far as how we structure our workouts, because it's important for adults to have flexibility, range of motion, all that stuff too. But I guess the transition to D1 was just working with all populations versus just collegiate athletes, right? So that's how they shaped it, is how do we take what I learned about collegiate athletes and what they need to be good at and how to program for them and get better at, how do I make it just as beneficial for the 6-year-old and just as beneficial for the 50-year-old, right? So that was the big change. But it remains the same. It's super basic. It's make sure they have their lungs, make sure they're aerobically trained, make sure they can move well, and make sure they're enjoying the training, make sure they have a foundation of strength, and then we can kind of get creative with the performance side of things. So across the board, that's what D1's really shown me, is that every population can do athletic-based training. There's just going to be progressions and regressions for the different age groups.
Sure, definitely. So I guess here's part B to that final question is, you've been in the field now for a little while. You've had a lot of experience. What do you know now that you didn't know when you started?
That I'll never learn everything. I thought that when I was younger, there was a point at which you stop learning and stop progressing. I just assumed that the guys that I knew, that I looked up to in the field, that I was able to, have, that the people that I consider my mentors, was obviously you're one of them. Dave is one of them, Coach Cos down south, and then, Coach Connolly, Coach Altoff, all those guys down at Baylor. A few of the guys that were kind of in and out at Washington State when I was there, but I thought they knew everything, right? But they like you can speak to this. It's like you'll never know everything. And the coolest part about what I did, like I was truly blessed to continue to move up the ranks, but once I felt like I knew enough to move on to the next phase, I was asked to do something different. And being outside of your comfort zone, and specifically in the health and fitness industry, just means that you're doing something right, because you're pushing the ante, and it just means you can have more of an impact on the greater good of so many more people. Like, talk about ceilings all the time. I know I'm kind of like a broken recorder, but I talk about ceilings. And as a coach, you have a ceiling at which how many athletes you can really help out, right? You can only do so many working hours in the day. You can only coach so many athletes, even in a team sport. But then if you move up, and now, like, I'm managing and I'm overseeing, just in our facility, 26 coaches with, and they coach over 250 athletes in a given day, right? So I get to oversee all of that. So it's like the impact is greater. But when I first started in this industry, I figured you can read all the books and do all the things, and then eventually you just know everything, and you just roll with it, and hopefully you're just going to lay in money. But we know in the health and fitness industry, that's not the case. But I also knew that I knew then what I know now is that I'm going to love every day being in this field, right? Every day is important. Every person you come across, you can help and proceed in their fitness goals. There's no more rewarding thing than people coming up to you and saying, because of you, I did this. And we get to do that every single day. And so, to circle back and answer your question, I thought there was a point at which you're going to know everything and had all the certifications, and then you can just try to continue to grow in something else. But I learned the not so hard way, and the most beneficial way possible, that you're never going to know everything. But it just means that you're progressing. If you feel out of your comfort zone, then it just means you're progressing in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your thoughts. I appreciate your time and your insight and your unique perspectives. So Tanner Lowry, General Manager of D1 Training, Boise, and one of the best guys you'll ever meet, and an avid WSU Coug. So
absolutely, go Cougs.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Connolly. I appreciate it. You guys be safe. Feel
Yeah.
free to give out my contact information that any fitness professional wants to get a hold of me. This is what we love to do, is
Great. Sounds good. Thank you, Tanner.
Yeah, be safe.